few months ago I made a video on chroming this one out. So this time is something kind of similar. I'm trying to clear these ones. And the difference between this and this one, on these ones, the outside cover is actually the red part. On this one, if you can tell, the outside is clear, but the inside's red. On this one, the inside of it is actually already all kind of chrome. So this one, there's no painting required. But the hard part is the fact that I gotta take this cover, which is clear, and put it on this thing. And that way, this red is gone. Last time when I was doing these taillights, I went in a lot of detail. This time, since it's pretty much the same thing, I won't repeat stuff. I'll just kind of talk about what's new. And I did kind of scan these taillights just a bit. When I was kind of looking at it closely, the edges of it is actually slightly different in certain places. So the tricky part with this project, which is probably harder than the other one, the hard part is kind of lining up the cuts of this one and this one together. So for now, what I'm thinking the plan is going to be on these ones, which are the old ones, and I want the lens. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to cut as close to the inside as I can and try to keep as much plastic attached to the cover. And on this one, I'm going to kind of try the opposite and stick to the outside so that there's more plastic attached to the center. Pretty much using the same tools I did last time, which is the Dremel with the cutting wheel, soldering iron, or if you have a proper hot knife for actually cutting these stuff. It's going to be the exact same process where I use the Dremel on the main outside parts, and then once you come to this thing, I'm going to use the soldering iron to melt it away. And going to be the same thing on both of them for sealing it at the end. This is what I'm using. I didn't say anything last time about it because I had no idea if that was actually good. I just kind of had it lying around, so I used it, and I didn't want to kind of give that name away and it was actually bad. But 6 months later, and my taillights that are on my car are perfectly fine. So at least now I can trust this one. So I'm going to start right away with the old one first. In the previous video, which I'll just link in the description, I showed exactly how I cut and which lines I kind of followed. I'm going to skip over that and come back once this is pretty much cut. There you go, and this is what you need now for the new taillights. Onto the new taillights now. So this one is pretty much the exact same idea. I'm going to be cutting all around. It is slightly different, which is not ideal, but I'm still going to go against that back line where the vertical wall starts, and just follow that. That way you're just going to get the neatest cut. And then coming to here, which again I'll kind of switch between the soldering iron and the drill. Luckily, looks like the drill bit actually reaches there. So this is what I'm going to use to get through this, because the soldering iron doesn't fit, and then the cutting disc is obviously not going to fit. I'm going to try to explain how this one was slightly different than the old ones. If you want to see a detailed view of how I kind of cut the old taillights, you can see that previous video I have. This one was pretty much the same thing of following the edge all the way around, and then there's a lot less gap here, so kind of less space to mess up. Especially if you're using a soldering iron all the way through, it's going to be a little tricky. The other thing I noticed on this edge, you got to be really careful because this chrome piece is very close. I think I've hit this part multiple times. It's fine since it's facing on the inside, so you're not going to see it from the front, but obviously you don't want to damage that too much, so you got to watch it for that. And then one thing I did, which I don't know if you really needed to, so I kind of faced the wheel more horizontal and cut it in this way rather than going vertical and cutting downward. And that was just because, if I can try to show this nicely, you kind of see how the black sticks up just a little bit. So that's why I was kind of worried if I cut down, I might hit into the red because I couldn't tell where exactly connected. So by cutting it in this direction, I was trying to make sure I'm on the inside rather than cutting the outside, if that makes sense. Then coming around here, honestly, like all these edges are very close to the chrome. And then coming to this section, which was the absolute worst. The soldering iron barely fit into this section. I had to keep kind of switching between the drill bit and trying to find every angle to get through this. So depending what tools you got with you, you're gonna have to try to figure out different angles just to get into this section, because it's so tight in between here. Take the old fully clear lens, and it's basically going to cover this. It's not going to fit perfectly because obviously the cuts were totally different. So next step I'm going to do is try aligning these two together and just trim this thing, because I left as much plastic as I could, so I have kind of extra space to trim it and make it fit this thing nicely. I still got to cut up the other side of the 2017s, and then I'm going to get to gluing this all together. I have both the lenses cut. I just have tape on this to stop it from getting scratched. So you don't really need this anymore. But I did want to mention something. So I didn't actually realize this from the start because I wasn't paying attention. But if you see this angle of the lenses, you can see this top one, which is the old 13 to 16 lights, is a lot thinner at the top, versus the red bit on the new ones is way taller. So I didn't notice that, and what's happening now, I'll show you in a sec. I have the other one put inside. It's not attached or sealed yet. I just literally pushed in the light into the old lens. So you can see now what's happening. The edge right here, I'm kind of tapping, but that ridge is already maxed out at the top. It's like touching the top of the lens. When you try to put these in, they don't actually fit in there. What this actually causes is that this whole piece has moved back. And for that to make sense, I'll put it on the car and show you what I mean. On the car, and so here's the issue. Because the lens is too short, it doesn't go all the way back. So you can see how there's a gap here. Come here, there's a gap. The bottom actually came out pretty good. There's a gap here because this piece is not flat against the car. And if you look even here, try to see how close this is to the bracket. And you can see how this piece has to go under this bracket. So that's how close it gets. And then over here, there's no gap. And why is that an issue? Because if you close the trunk, it hits the lens. Obviously this is the hard part, and I think this part is the section that you should decide whether or not you want to do this to your lights, especially if you don't have any extra ones to fall back on. So I've already gone this far. I'm committed to doing this. So I'm going to take some more time, and once I have a clear idea, I'm going to come back. So I think from now till the end of the video, I'm sorry, but I think this is going to be a very messy video because I honestly am trying to figure this out as I go. So if you're trying this, make sure you're up for the challenge of figuring things out for yourself, because from this point on, I don't know how helpful I'll be. I'm going to try and focus on getting this edge to fit as naturally as possible. So I'm going to try to push this in as much into the car as possible, because that's probably the most visible section of the car, and everything else is a lot more easier to hide, especially the bottom. So if you see, if I try to close this gap, I'm twisting this whole lens this way because there's actually some space in the lens here. This part is actually not maxed out, but it stops because this edge hits first. So if I try to tilt this, it will give me a chance to get closer to the car here, and it looks much better. The sacrifice of that is that there's going to be a way bigger gap down here, but because 90% of the time and 90% of the people are going to be looking from up here, they're not going to see this bottom. All you have to do is make sure it seals properly. You don't have to make it look too good. Here's the latest update on what I figured I'd do. I started cutting here. As you can see, this one I've left the same so I can kind of show a comparison. What I did here was trim kind of edge sticking out all around here, so it's missing this part here, which is just this lip. You can see it does end up going through, which is not a big deal because I can seal this up and it's still, all attached. It's not going to come off. And now this kind of gets the main issue out of the way, which was the trunk hitting this part because it was sticking out so much. This side's the cut one, this is uncut. It hits right on that lip. So now I gotta take this off. It's not fully screwed in, so I can still, and now there's a decent amount of gap. You can see now, trunk's closed, and it's just really close. This whole part had to be cut just because it passes there. As you can see, it's not the cleanest look. What I'm gonna do next with this, at least, I'm gonna try to file it and sand it down to make it as round and smooth as possible so it doesn't look like something actually got cut there. I lined up my cut with the tape, so I suggest cutting just a bit, put it on the car, see if it fits, and keep going that way and going more and more until it fits on the car. Again, just start with a bit and then move your way down as you actually need it. So you can see this is actually way more than I have set here, but I'm going to start off with this and then move it down if I have to. As I'm putting this one on, I think I might actually have to widen the lens, like the inside of it, a little better, because on this side, which is a little dark, so this side actually doesn't fit as well as the other one. You can see my whole finger fits in there, so I tried to shift the lens over as much as I could, but it's a little tight, so I might have to do more trimming on the inside so that this whole lens can shift a little more around the actual light inside. I'm going to go ahead, do the rest of it, and come back when that's done. Here's a quick update with kind of my thought process. I kind of chose the positioning of the light after putting it in the car and kind of figuring out what kind of fitment I want. I taped it up in place, just lightly, and then you can see I just plastic welded a bunch of spots. So this is similar to when I did the pre-facelift lights, but so this side you can kind of see it's somewhat normal, like everything lines up nicely, the gap is very small, and then once you come to this side is like the whole fitment issue. So you can see there's a huge gap, like my finger can kind of fit in there, and this is obviously because I'm trying to make it look nicer when it's on the car. This is the bottom of the taillight, so you're not going to see all this mess. What I did was I actually bought this thing, which is like the paint kind of tray, and I just bought this for $2, and I started cutting pieces of plastic off of it, and it melted nice enough to where it was a good, I guess, welding filler. Now at this point I have enough where like it can kind of hold itself in the cover, and the rest of it I'm just going to use my sealant on. I'm just going to do this on my own time, and then once I get to the right taillight I'll kind of record all my steps, including all this welding part. One thought I had was, you know, plastic welding every single gap, but one thing is that that's going to take a while, and the fumes off melting plastic is probably horrible for me. But the main thing was that I wasn't sure if these really badly welded plastic is going to seal properly, because I'm literally using a soldering iron. It's not like some proper process. I'm thinking that if I plastic weld everything, there's more chance of random gaps in between the plastics and stuff. I'll put enough just to hold it together, and then the rest of the gaps I'm gonna just fill with sealant. Here's what it looks like on the car. The fitment on this side is actually surprisingly good. I'm pretty stoked on that side. You still have this gap, and you can see at the bottom. So this section is actually would have been exposed, but since I put the sealant now, it looks like it's like actually properly closed, which is nice. And then same with the top here, that would have been exposed, but because of the black sealant, is actually pretty proper. Now that I kind of figured this out a little bit, I can kind of go in a bit more details with this side. At this point I can't really remember what I mentioned about this side, but on this side I got super lucky because the way I cut it was so nice, where this part over here actually hooked onto the actual light inside, and then when I closed this end, I could actually force it in close while this kind of stays hooked onto this end. On this side I didn't get so lucky, and if you see now, if I line this up, what happens on here is that this part is sticking out. So if you see, if I push this in now, that side comes out. So for this side, what I'm trying to do here is fix this side first and then do the plastic welding. And then when this side is kind of held together, I'm just going to force this side in. It will kind of bend into shape. Alright, I don't know if I put too much or too little So I'm going to try bending it and see. I think it's better that I put more and less and it just breaks off. Well, I wasn't recording, but I barely pushed this side down and this side totally snapped off. I'm going to try to make sure it's maybe stuck a little better. I think I just didn't go deep enough. So let me do that again and then I'm going to try again. Before I do a quick test fit on the car, show you how much I kind of rolled it up. So all the way from here, took it all around to here, and then I kind of held with one hand while I kind of held this section together. And I think that's all I did. Oh, I did a small section right here. Now I'm going to do a quick test on the car just to make sure it's doing alright before I continue on. Trying it out on the car, you can see surprisingly did well. It's definitely not as good as the other side. I still think I got super lucky on this end, but I think I'm gonna be okay with this. I'm gonna keep it as is. I don't want to take it apart and make it worse because this is better than I thought I would get on my first try. I'm just gonna go weld the rest of it and then seal it up. I think this should be good. I got a big patch there, all around here. I got a big gap here, but I think that should be fine. Another big gap. This whole section inside is open, just because I can't really fit the soldering iron in there. Got my silicone sealant out, ready to go. I already kind of started here, because when I opened this container, it just all spilled out, so I didn't want to waste it. But I started putting some on here. But I mean, this is pretty simple. Just cover as much gaps as possible. So the way I like to do this is I just try to put like a nice line down. You can see how I cut the tip there. It is decently big. Gets a nice line down, and then I dip my glove in a bit of water just so it doesn't stick to the glove, and I try to spread it out so it's nice and kind of compact and spread evenly across the gap. Oh. So now in this case, since I'm trying to stack this up to cover this gap, I'm not going to really spread it that much with my finger. Just going to kind of leave a nice thick line so I have some kind of layer to stack up on top later. Just going to give you an idea of what the first pass looks like. So you can see I have obvious gaps there. And then coming around the other side. It's hard to tell, but I don't have everything covered, but I just think it's better to do it in like 2-3 passes instead of just trying to get every spot at once. It's actually been 2 days. These things are dry, ready to go. One thing you can do, I did this in the previous video when I did the older taillights. What you can do is put the light underneath the lens, and you can actually see if any light passes through. That means you have a hole there. Without the light, it's really hard to see, especially if you're using black sealant. If you go on the previous video, if you want to see what I mean by, spotting those holes. But these are all good, and I'm excited to put these on the car. This is my final product. Honestly, so much better than I thought, because after kind of finding out how difficult this is going to be, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to do it. Here's with the lights on. And I like this a lot better than the 2013 lights chromed out, because this doesn't really affect the light too much. Sanded and cleaned off the edges, so it looks a bit more smoother now. So that is pretty much it for these. If you have any questions, you can leave in the comments. I'll try to answer questions. I may try to do another set because these are actually for someone else. This was my first one I'm doing, so there were still mistakes I think I could have fixed and made it a lot nicer. I may do this for myself again, and then I can maybe give updates if I manage to make anything neater.